There we go. We were just talking about favorite colors, and I was doing some reading on color psychology because I did a photo shoot recently, and that's something I would never normally do for myself, like do a photo shoot. But I have a lecture talk coming up next month for Sunstone. It's a kind of I suppose it is an LDS, a Mormon organization, but with their symposiums that they put on, it's open to everybody as long as it's the discourse is within the parameters of whatever topic is being given for that year. So this one was about suffering and grace and that kind of thing. So I managed to get a position doing a talk for this year's symposium. And I'm going to be doing mine on the metaphysics of suffering. And I'm very much looking forward to it. I'll be going live then on July 30th at 10 a.m. And when the time comes, I'll post up more information in the Almighty John cast because some of you may want to see that. It'll be $20. So if you don't want to pay that, I'm not getting any of it, I don't think. But I'm going to be recording it on my own, and then I'll upload it later. So even if you can't make it, you'll still be able to see it at some point, I'm sure, which is fine. Hey, there's my icons. Can't really see it well. All right. So we've got an interesting John cast today. Yes, we do. And we're going to start off with Gnosticism. So the question that was actually posed was opinions on Gnosticism. And I'll start off with a little bit of the history of Gnosticism, just because it's kind of interesting. When you normally think about Gnosticism, you think about early Christian heresies. And this brings up some very interesting stuff because Gnosticism is made a proper noun, but Gnosticism is not, like, there was no Gnostic church. There was no organized Gnostic religion. It's essentially a descriptor given to a broad group of cults and denominations, so to speak, that share the same basic kind of characteristics. And we'll go over those characteristics. But first and foremost, so if you don't know what a Gnostic is or what Gnosticism is, just a little bit of the etymology. So Gnosticism, it comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means like to know, basically. So if you say I'm agnostic, it just means I don't know, and I don't think we can know. So you might think that a Gnostic is somebody who says, we can know. But the emphasis is different because with Gnosticism, the three main things that differentiate it from Christianity, and that kind of comparison needs to be made because the Gnostic groups, the Gnostic Christians who got themselves into trouble with the early church, let's see. Just trying to think where to start. They basically, shucks. All right, let's go over Gnosticism and these three things that differentiate themselves from Christianity. So first of all, you have a dualistic anthropology, which is to say that there is the body and then there is the spirit. Now, on the surface, this might not sound that different from Christianity, because Christians also have somewhat of a dualistic anthropology to Well, no, not really. I mean, Christians view humans as compound creatures. We have a spirit, and yes, at death, the spirit is severed from the body. But God creates, for example, Adam and Eve. At the beginning, it's what makes them human is that combination. And of course, in the resurrection, Christians, we believe that the body and spirit will be united. Now, this is juxtaposed against the Gnostics, who believe that all matter, period, all physical creation, period, is evil or fallen or gross and bad. Spirit, the spirit realm, is what's good. And so Gnosticism therefore becomes an attempt to escape from the physical realm, to escape from your body. This dualistic anthropology translates into a dualistic theology. Gnosticism essentially becomes polytheistic because you have the supreme God who is called the monad. And this supreme God is pure spirit. Now, there's some very interesting stuff here because you have the monad, but the monad has essentially nothing to do with creation. Rather, because matter is gross, matter is fallen, matter is evil. So the one, the monad, who is perfect and good, would have nothing to do with creation. No, rather, it is the second deity in order from the monad called the demiurge. The demiurge is responsible for creation. And because creation is bad, the demiurge is looked at as essentially lesser, inferior, and even evil in some circles. So, I mean, these are only two out of these three differentiating characteristics from Christianity. And of course, the anthropology separates it. And we'll go into some of the history of heresies within the Christian church that tie into this. And then we have a dualistic theology, which essentially leads to polytheism, which again is unchristian. But then the third, which is very interesting to me, is this emphasis, and this is where they get their name, but their emphasis on gnosis, a mystical, spiritual, secret knowledge. So secret knowledge is something else that really characterizes Gnosticism. It's kind of tricky because, as I understand it, we don't have a lot of primary sources from the Gnostics themselves. Most of what we have is actually polemics written by Christians against the Gnostics. Polemics is basically just like an attack, like a verbal or written attack. So if I engage in polemics against Gnosticism, it's, criticism of Gnosticism. So as far as the heresiology goes, well, no, before I go into that, I just want to touch a little bit more on gnosis, because we've touched on what's Christian or not Christian about the Gnostics' anthropology and their theology. What is unchristian about the Gnostics' soteriology, their means of like getting to heaven, so to speak, is this secret knowledge. So where a Christian would have a problem with this is, number one, the secret element, and number two, the secret knowledge component. So the issue with secrecy is Christianity from the very get-go, even as far as back as the Old Testament, nothing was secret. Nothing was secret. It's not like the Freemasons doing everything with buildings with no windows, locked doors, secret gradual steps where we reveal knowledge to you when you're ready. There are no adepts in that way. It's very open. It's a public theology. everybody is welcome, everybody can be saved. But with Gnosticism, some problems arise because, okay, so, and here's where I would be open to hearing from a Gnostic, for example, but some problems that I'm picking out in that is you see this asked of Christians pretty frequently, which is, what about, so it's fine and dandy for you people who grew up in a place that has a Christian presence. It's all fine and dandy for you guys to say that you're saved or hope that you're saved. But what about the African children who grew up not knowing anything about Christ? And to make it even worse, their parents were killed and they were forced into a militia, and they ended up carrying out all these atrocities where, they may not be fully culpable, I mean, how culpable can a child be who is groomed? How, that's a very tough line. Anyways, so I'm just trying to paint the most extreme scenario. The Christian answer, you'll find a spectrum. Some will say, I mean, if you're talking to a Calvinist, no, they're damned. That's fine. They're damned. Yeah, they're in hell. There are some pretty well-known Calvinists in the Utah circuit who have been pretty nonchalant. Yeah, Anne Frank is in hell. Sorry. So that's on the one extreme. But most reasonable Christians would, of course, say no. Heavens, no. That's beyond our knowledge. God is the perfect judge, and ultimately, whoever is going to be saved, that's his will. He's perfectly merciful, perfectly knowledgeable, and the perfect judge. It's not for us to say. It's not for us to know. And as my own priest has said, not everybody who's Orthodox is going to be saved. And in fact, when you are in the hereafter, you will be quite surprised to see a lot of people that you may have looked down on in the kingdom of heaven. So never be too proud. Anyways, so that's sort of the spectrum. But back to what I was actually engaging with, the problem I see with Gnosticism is your salvation, your escape from the physical shell of your body hinges upon your ability to obtain secret knowledge. So it's just, if somebody's going to throw the most extreme scenario to me, a Christian, the African boy who was forced into a militia and then he committed a whole host of atrocities, it's like, okay, that's a really tough nugget. How about somebody with Down syndrome? If we're on the Gnostic side, so how about somebody with Down syndrome, somebody who can't process that secret knowledge, let alone go out and find it? But even if the person with Down syndrome, even if he was presented with this secret knowledge, he couldn't do much with it, So it seems fairly exclusionary. It seems no bueno. It falls into the same kind of trap that an extreme Calvinist would. Sorry. Your cousin with Down syndrome, your brother with autism, they are damned to die in their mortal shell and remain with creation. So as far as Gnosticism goes, those would be my big critiques. But back to, I mentioned the history behind the heresies. You have even mentioned in the Gospel of John, you'll notice in the Gospel of John, there's a heavy emphasis on acknowledging that Jesus Christ, that the Logos came down in the flesh, that Jesus suffered in the flesh. There's all of these emphases in John on Christ in the flesh. Why is that? Well, even in the earliest days, the church had to fight against heresies, competing worldviews. And this is warned against plenty of times in the letters of St. Paul. People are going to come and they're going to try to take you away. They're going to try to deceive you with false Christs, a false Jesus, some other idea that is totally not true. And so enter the Docetists, which is who the Apostle John and his scribes are writing about in the Gospel of John. The Docetists. These are people who did not believe that Jesus really was here in the flesh. Because from a Gnostic perspective, if Jesus really is the good deity, the good God, then he's certainly not going to be physical creation. He's not going to be material. So the Docetists believed that Jesus only appeared to have suffered, that he only appeared to be here in the flesh. So I just like to bring that up. There are others that I'm going to cover here in a second, but I like to bring that up because people sometimes like to say, you're being way too restrictive. Like if I'm talking with Mormons about my issues with Mormonism and why I view Mormonism in the same way that I view the Gnostics, essentially. Like they're in the same box. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not making any judgment against Mormons. I'm just saying they're in the same box. You can't do that. Like blah, 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 blah. I say, well, I mean, St. Apostle, or St. Paul, the Apostle, St. John, the early church, all of them were just as concerned with false Christs as any of us now. So I don't see that as a very strong point to make, to try to get us to be more permissive, There's an emphasis on being watchful of false Christs. And where's the danger in that? Well, it's like if you give too much ground on something like that, like Jesus never having suffered in the flesh, you end up with a whole host of problems that pertain to our salvation, which I can get into if you want. Because there is a very real precedent with something like that gets set that derails the whole thing. Basically, just put very short, if Christ did not adopt human nature in its entirety, then human nature in its entirety cannot be saved. The whole point of the incarnation of the Logos in Christ was to save creation, was to restore creation. Took on human flesh to save human flesh. And if Christ did not take on human flesh, but only appeared to, that is a huge problem as regards to the resurrection, as regards to our ultimate fate, like how, to what extent we are saved. In a Gnostic sense, that may be coherent, because if Christ only appeared to take on flesh, and maybe he only took on our spirit nature, then in Christ's ascension, only the spirit part of human nature is saved. And again, that's why it's important. That's why you can only be so permissive. Now, all of that being said, I'm reading a very good book on Irenaeus of Lyon, Identifying Christianity, by Father John Behr, who is a remarkable writer. And I would definitely recommend that you look up any YouTube videos by him, Father John Behr. He's very, very just insightful and remarkable. But he points out some very interesting things, because St. Irenaeus is best known for his book Against Heresies, which is right here. It's actually, I think, 4 books. I've not been able to read all of it because it's really, it doesn't look that big. It is big, but it's really dense. So I'm kind of taking it in chunks. I read a lot of it for my master's thesis, but anywho, where was I? Catholicity. So why is the Roman Catholic Church called Catholic? Why do the Orthodox claim to be the one true holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And I'm open to correction on this, but even other churches like the Church of England and the Coptics, I might be wrong on this, but I believe they also claim to be Catholic. Catholic means universal. So what does that mean? Universal means it can be applied anywhere. It isn't restricted to just the Greeks. It isn't restricted to just the Jews. It's open to everybody, which again takes us away from Gnosticism, because it needs to be a public theology. It needs to be something that a mentally handicapped person can benefit from, and which a super high-minded theologian can benefit from. Something that a bottom of the bucket poor person can benefit from, and something that a king can benefit from. So it doesn't just pertain to physical or mental status or worldly status either. It's with ideas too. And that's something that Father John Bear really drives home well in this, is that the church has always been pretty permissive of different ideas too. It's also an ideological Catholicity. And of course, as we just went over, there are limits to that. You cannot be Catholic to the extent that you would permit an idea of Christ not having assumed all of human nature. So there are limits. But for example, you have in the early church ideas of multiple degrees of heaven. The most common, of course, which you've heard in popular culture, is seventh heaven, 7 heavens. There's even been speculation about 10 levels of heaven. The church's theology is defined not just by sola scriptura, not just by the Bible alone, because the Bible wasn't even compiled. It was a long process to compile the Bible, and it wasn't officially canonized until the 300s, I think. So it can't be sola scriptura. That is just, it's incoherent. It's not going to work. You also have holy tradition, which is passed on by the apostles through the apostolic fathers, the ante-Nicene fathers, and eventually crystallizes in the church. Then you have the writings of the church fathers, which is also very helpful in authority. Basically, what I'm getting at is the doctrines of the church are usually defined in synods and councils, ecumenical councils. Ecumenical councils have always been called defensively. The church did not just decide, we're going to get together and have the Council of Nicaea because we want to make up this Trinity doctrine. No, the church always believed in the Trinity. The church always believed in the shared deity and ontological oneness of the 3 persons of the Trinity. What happened is Arius, the arch heretic, innovated his own theology, his own ideas, and he broke off from the church. He tried to get the church to conform to his ideas instead of having that openness, that open dialogue, and letting that open dialogue play itself out. In fact, the whole thing kicked off because Arius, who is in Alexandria, confronted the bishop of Alexandria, Alexander, and he said, you're wrong, this is wrong. And if you're not familiar with the church history, Arius basically believed that the Son, the Logos, was produced by the Father as an act of will. Basically, the Son is a creature, i.e., he was created. And this, of course, did not go over well because this was something the church had played with in the past. You have St. Justin Martyr, who was trying to work this out, and I believe he ended up in a place believing that the Son was produced by an act of will. Then you have that same thread picked up by Origen, who ended up concluding that the Son and Holy Spirit are begotten. They are created in a sense, but they are eternally generated. Eternally begotten, because it's from the Father's own essence that the Son and Holy Spirit are begotten, and it's an eternal act of generation. If you think of the Son is eternal in this example. The Son is the Father, eternal. The Son has existed eternally. The Father has existed. Would there then be a time when the Son had not generated light and heat? No. But the light and heat are generated by the Son, S-U-N. So that analogy is the way that the early church fathers talked when communicating this. So, sorry, all of this seems like a diatribe, but it plays in, I swear. Because it's just to say that, okay, so St. Justin Martyr had some ideas about the generation of the Son and Holy Spirit, which are not 100% orthodox, yet he's still a saint. Yet his theology is still revered. It's because he had that openness. Origen, same thing. He's condemned as a heretic posthumously at the Fifth Ecumenical Council. It was a long time. It was posthumous. And there's a lot I could get into on Origen. But basically, during his lifetime at least, Origen was revered. He was someone who corrected others in their theology. There are issues with Origen, sure. He wasn't right on everything, sure. But the point is, there was that room to breathe that was allowed. And you even see that in the church today. And the point that all of this is making is that Arius tried to get the church to conform to his ideas. He came out, he said, no, I have it. I have it. And he tried to reform the church. He tried to correct the church on their fallen bad views. Does this sound familiar? It goes back. You have Marcion, which is where the Marcionites come from. The Marcionites, really quick, basically believed that the God of the Old Testament is a different God from the New Testament because this God is bad and this God is good. The church was like, no, that's not true. And he broke off and formed his own group. Same with Valentinus, blah, 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 blah. It's when you look at the history, it's almost always the groups, these heretics who break off from the church and form their own group, their own denomination. So, as far as why Gnosticism is a no-no, I think I've already played out that. I'm almost done with this diatribe, and then we'll get to questions and comments. But I think I've sufficiently pointed out why Gnosticism is a no-no. But I also wanted to read a couple of excerpts, just because it's interesting how my understanding is that Gnosticism was viewed as by the church as sort of an antiquated thing that didn't really have any relevance, that was a thing of the past. Those quaint little heresies. But Gnosticism has become more of a danger, or a perceived danger, in the past 50 or 70 years, just because we'll get into it. Let's see. Do you mind if I read 2.5 pages of something? I don't think you mind. You're here. So let's do it. This is an excerpt from Orthodoxy, the Religion of the Future by Father Seraphim Rose, who is a brilliant writer, and it would do my heart so good if he ended up being canonized. If all of this is a little heavy for you and you're like, it's a religion, it's like, number one, this is what the episode is called. So you knew what you were getting into. And there's a lot of other stuff we're going to go over. So if the religion thing is not your cup of tea necessarily, just stick with me for another 5 or 10 minutes. If I accidentally fall into a Father Seraphim Rose accent, forgive me. This is in a section called "The Spirit of the Last Times," and this section itself is called "The New Christianity." There may be those who will doubt that the charismatic revival is a form of mediumism, that is, only a secondary question of the means or technique by which the spirit of the charismatic revival is communicated. But that this spirit has nothing to do with Orthodox Christianity is abundantly clear. And in fact, this spirit follows almost to the letter the prophecies of Nicholas Berdyaev concerning the new Christianity. It completely leaves behind the monastic ascetic spirit of historical orthodoxy, which most effectively exposes its falsity. It is not satisfied with the conservative Christianity which directs the spiritual forces of man only towards contrition and salvation, but rather, apparently, believing like Berdyaev that such a Christianity is still incomplete, adds a second level of spiritual phenomena, not one of which is specifically Christian in character, although one is free to interpret them as Christian, which are open to people of every denomination with or without repentance, and which are completely unrelated to salvation. It looks to a new era of Christianity and a new deep spirituality, which means a new outpouring of the Holy Spirit, in complete contradiction of Orthodox tradition and prophecy. This is truly a new Christianity. But the specifically new ingredient in this Christianity is nothing original or advanced, but merely a modern form of the devil's age-old religion of shamanistic paganism. The Orthodox charismatic periodical, The Logos, recommends Nicholas Berdyaev as a prophet precisely because he was, quote, the greatest theologian of spiritual creativeness. And indeed, it is precisely the shamans of every primitive tribe who know how to get in contact with and utilize the primordial creative powers of the universe, those spirits of earth and sky and sea, which the Church of Christ recognizes as demons, and in serving which it is indeed possible to attain to a creative ecstasy and joy, the Nietzschean enthusiasm and ecstasy to which Berdyaev felt so close. These are unknown to the weary and half-hearted Christians who fall for the charismatic deception. But there is no Christ here. God has forbidden contact with this creative, occult realm into which the Christians have stumbled through ignorance and self-deception. The charismatic revival will have no need to enter a dialogue with non-Christian religions, because under the name of Christianity, it is already embracing non-Christian religion and is itself becoming a new religion which Berdyaev foresaw, strangely combining Christianity and paganism. Ooh, there's a lot we're going to get into here. One sec. Almost done. The strange Christian spirit of the charismatic revival is clearly identified in the Holy Scriptures and the Orthodox patristic tradition. According to these sources, world history will culminate in an almost superhuman Christian figure, the false Messiah, or Antichrist. He will be Christian in the sense that his whole function and his very being will center on Christ, whom he will imitate in every respect possible. And he will not merely be the greatest enemy of Christ, but in order to deceive Christians will appear to be Christ, come to earth for a second time and ruling from the restored temple in Jerusalem. He quotes 2 Thessalonians 2, 3-4 and 9 through 12. I'll read that really quick. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, apostasy, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Even him whose concerning is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send them a strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believed not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Almost. The Orthodox teaching concerning the Antichrist is a large subject in itself and cannot be presented here. But if, as the followers of the charismatic revival believe, the last days are indeed at hand, it is of crucial importance for the Orthodox Christian to be informed of this teaching concerning one who, as the Savior himself has told us, together with the false prophets of that time, shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. And the elect are certainly not those multitudes of people who are coming to accept the gross and most unscriptural delusion that the world is on the threshold of a great spiritual awakening, but rather the little flock to which alone our Savior has promised. Even the true elect will be sorely tempted by the great signs and wonders of the Antichrist, but most Christians will accept him without any question, for his new Christianity is precisely what they seek. Whew! Thank you. But there's some very interesting things in there, just because he's talking about the charismatic revival, the charismatics. And this is interesting because another really quick history lesson, like we were talking with the history of heresies, it's always the arch heretic, whether it's Arius or Marcion or Valentinus or whoever started the Docetists, they always set themselves apart from the church. They always break themselves off rather than letting the conversation play out. And so where else do you see this take place? This is where I don't want to offend people. But you also see this happening with the Church of England, which broke off for the sake of divorce and maintaining their own political and worldly power apart from the Catholic Church, which in the Middle Ages was at the zenith of its secular power. So all of that's to say is, like, you can empathize with the Church of England to an extent. You can empathize with the Reformers to an extent, because after the King of England, after the Church of England, you have the Reformation, where you have people like Martin Luther and John Calvin. And I know that Martin Luther had originally intended to try to reform the church. Awesome. But I'm not 100% familiar with that. But what ended up happening was the reformers ended up breaking off. Same deal. And, some of the grievances were totally justified. The selling of indulgences, papal infallibility. It's like that's stuff that the Orthodox actually have problems with too. And it's interesting because even Martin Luther wrote praising the Orthodox, that he said, I think it was something like, besides us, they're the best. Thanks. But yeah, so, and then later on you have the Restorationist movement in the 1800s, predominantly in the US, where you have the advent of the Quakers and the LDS and the Campbellites, and I think the Church of Science too, the Christian Science too. And there was one more, Seventh-day Adventists, same thing. And what this kind of gets to that really interested me was basically just opening up the church in a way that appears to be universal, but in fact is throwing out the baby with the bathwater. That's what interests me about what he's talking about in here, that they will have no need to enter a dialogue with non-Christian religions because under the name of Christianity, it is already embracing non-Christian religion and is itself becoming a new religion, which Berdyaev foresaw. That's what interests me. I have one more thing that I'm going to read from. What fascinates me too is this is something that you're seeing not only in the Christian world, which the Orthodox generally refer to as ecumenism. So you have an ecumenical council. That's a council where everybody comes together and we're going to hash this out. Is Arius right or is the church right? There's a lot I could go into on that, but the point is it's like everybody, ecumenical. So with ecumenism, it's sort of good ecumenism is, hey, let's Orthodox and Anglicans get together and serve the homeless. Hell yeah, dude, let's do that. Bad ecumenism is, let's try to unite the Orthodox and Catholic Church again, to reunite them. And to do so, maybe some concessions need to be made. Maybe we give up on these things that we really felt strong about, basically compromising yourself for the sake of unity. Compromising yourself for the sake of unity. That's something you wouldn't want to do on a personal level. Why would you do it with the foundation of your worldview? So, not to harp on liberalism all the time, but because I gave a pretty good critique of capitalism too. I forget which episode that was, but you remember, I railed against capitalism. But this is another book by Father Seraphim Rose called Nihilism, The Root of the Revolution of the Modern Age. Wonderful book. But this ecumenism, I don't quite have my finger on it, but what's happening with this modern movement of ecumenism is something that is, I don't know if it's simultaneous, but you see this kind of thing happening in the secular world too. And maybe that'll actually be a good segue into the great American Second Civil War that actually could be coming up. But I'm going to read another 2.5 pages. This should go by quicker, bigger font. The liberalism we shall describe in the following pages is not, let us state at the outset, an overt nihilism. It is rather a passive nihilism, or, better yet, the neutral breeding ground of the more advanced stages of nihilism. Those who have followed our earlier discussion concerning the impossibility of spiritual or intellectual neutrality in the world will understand immediately why we have classified as nihilist a point of view which, while not directly responsible for striking nihilist phenomena, has been an indispensable prerequisite for their appearance. The incompetent defense by liberalism of a heritage in which it has never fully believed has been one of the most potent causes of overt nihilism. The liberal humanist civilization, which, in Western Europe, was the last form of the old rule order that was effectively destroyed in the Great War and the revolutions of the second decade of this century, and which continues to exist, though in an even more attenuated democratic form, in the free world today, may be principally characterized by its attitude toward truth. This is not an attitude of open hostility, nor even a deliberate unconcern, for its sincere apologists undeniably have a genuine regard for what they consider to be truth. Rather, it is an attitude in which truth, despite certain appearances, no longer occupies the center of attention. Rather, it is an attitude in which, despite certain appearances, no longer occupies the center of attention. The truth in which it professes, this was written in the 60s, by the way, I think. The truth in which it professes to believe, apart, of course, from scientific fact, is, for it, no spiritual or intellectual coin of current circulation, but idle and unfruitful capital left over from a previous age. The liberal still speaks, at least on formal occasions, of eternal verities, of faith, of human dignity, of man's high calling or his unquenchable spirit, or even of Christian civilization. But it is quite clear that these words no longer mean what they once meant. No liberal takes them with entire seriousness. They are, in fact, metaphors, ornaments of language that are meant to evoke an emotional, not an intellectual response. A response largely conditioned by long usage with the attendant memory of a time when such words actually had positive and serious meaning. Should I skip this? No, this is important. Almost there. No one today who prides himself on his sophistication, that is to say, very few in academic institutions, in government, in science, in humanist intellectual circles, no one who wishes or professes to be abreast of the times, does or can fully believe in absolute truth, or more particularly in Christian truth. Yet the name of truth has been retained, as have been the names of those truths men once regarded as absolute, and few in any position of authority or influence would hesitate to use them, even when they are aware that their meanings have changed. Truth, in a word, has been reinterpreted. The old forms have been emptied and given a new quasi-nihilist content. Oof! Oof! The old forms have been emptied and given a new quasi-nihilist content. This may easily be seen by a brief examination of several of the principal areas in which truth has been reinterpreted. This all sounds very 1984, too. Just a little page and a half, almost there. In the theological order, the first truth is, of course, God, omnipotent and omnipresent creator of all, revealed to faith and in the experience of the faithful, and not contradicted by the reason of those who do not deny faith. God is the supreme end of all creation, and himself, unlike his creation, finds his end in himself. Everything created stands in relation to and dependence upon him, who alone depends upon nothing outside of himself. He has created the whole world so that it might live in enjoyment of him, and everything in the world is oriented towards this end, which, however, men may miss by a misuse of their freedom. And here's the final stretch. The modern mentality cannot tolerate such a God. He is both too intimate, too personal, even too human, and too absolute, too uncompromising in his demands of us, and he makes himself known only to humble faith, a fact bound to alienate the proud modern intelligence. A new God is clearly required by modern man, a God more closely fashioned after the pattern of such central modern concerns as science and business. It has, in fact, been an important intention of modern thought to provide such a God. This intention is clear already in Descartes. It is brought to fruition in the deism of the Enlightenment, developed to its own end in German idealism. The new God is not a being, but an idea. Not revealed to faith and humility, but constructed by the proud mind that still feels the need for explanation when it has lost its desire for salvation. This is the dead God of philosophers who require only a first cause to complete their systems, as well as of positive thinkers and other religious sophists who invent a God because they need him, and then think to use him at will. Whether deist, idealist, pantheist, or immanentist, all the modern gods are of the same mental construct, fabricated by souls dead from the loss of faith in the true God. Okay, we made it. No more big quotes, I promise. But I just thought that was so interesting because it really does reflect not only the religious issues I see in the world right now, but also the secular issues. Capital T truth it takes a backseat. I hate to say it, but facts don't care about your feelings. Ben Shapiro. Facts don't care about your feelings. But it's true, and it should. I mean, it's become a meme now because Ben Shapiro, made it famous, but it's true. It should be true. Facts don't care about your feelings, and we should adhere ourselves to truth. Capital T truth. Not, that's just my truth. That's just my truth. I'm living my truth. I agree with that. But when it comes into contradiction with capital T truth, we need to have a conversation. I don't know how much I want to get into that because that's almost kind of its own subject, but you see exactly what I'm pointing at, right? And boy, that is a lot. That is 53 minutes of Gnosticism. Should we do something? Let me do questions first. And then I think we'll move on to my pooping my pants story. Just in case you ever think like, wow, John's so full of himself. He's like just embellishing all of this. He's just, nah, man. I don't have any high ideas of myself. I'm about to tell you a story about when I pooped my pants. Clayton says, like, it's only secret because no one else can give it to you or explain it to you, even if they tried really hard. Chris says, didn't the Marcionite Church eventually join the Catholics? I don't think so. Al Baker says, I'm not religious, but this is fascinating. Good. And I think that this might come off the wrong way, but whatever. I think we need better religious literacy in our schools now, because I never knew what a Protestant. I had a vague idea of what a Protestant was. I knew what Catholics were, but I had no idea what the Anglican Church was. It's the Church of England. Or the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church is basically just the American branch of the Church of England. Episcopals are basically Anglicans, American Anglicans. Like, you don't know any of that. I don't know about you. I was never taught any of that in school. And it's not like some kind of earth-shattering big knowledge, but it's fundamental, you know? If you ever meet an Anglican, or if you ever meet a Baptist, or a Catholic, or someone who's Orthodox, or somebody who's a Muslim, or Hindu, or Buddhist, like, I think that kids need a world religions class, a religious studies class. I think that would really balance us out and help us understand each other. There's so much emphasis on understanding each other, but I think part of understanding each other is being able to say, you know, at least a little bit about what makes them them, you know? Chris says, indeed, I have some friends who are Christian who believe in reincarnation. Oy vey. I'm not sure I would agree, but it's an interesting subject for sure. Al says, it is precisely the left's focus on emotion above all else, I think, that has brought about this second civil war. That is something very interesting that Al said. Not necessarily the first half, although I do agree, but he says that has brought about this second civil war. Al isn't talking in future tense. He's talking past tense. That's something we're going to get into. The Civil War is already happening. That's what I'm saying. We're already in there. We're in it. Welcome. You're in the Second American Civil War, as far as I'm concerned. Al said, we're going to talk more about that after I talk about the time I pooed my pants. Al says, suffice it to say, the political tension is why, if I must stay in California, I feel that I must enter into the state legislature to change it for the better from within. That's not kind of sad. That's noble. But what I think is sad, B before A, what I think is sad is I have watched videos of Democratic Californian political leaders, like mayors and that kind of thing, even like city council. I don't know. I watched 2 documentaries on it. But they were talking about how they have issues with all of this stuff too. And it's just bad. It's so bad. It really has shaken my faith in democracy. I'm not even kidding. Like, I'm not saying burn it all down, but my faith in democracy is really, really, really shaken right now. I think democracy on a local level is tremendous and we should have it. But you see the charts sometimes, right? Talking about how, like, the Republicans and Democrats used to overlap. And over time, they voted together less and less. It's like, oh man, we're going to get into that too. There's a lot of stuff that, like, we're hinting at right now. But our faith and trust in our authorities, we actually talked about this last time too, when we were talking about police brutality, but our faith in our authorities. Anyways, let's get this poo story out of the way. Oh man, do I have my old phone? I might have pictures. If I have any... Oh man, I don't know if you should. I don't know if you would even want the pictures. You're like, you took pictures? What's wrong with you? Yeah, my old phone isn't turning on. But in any case, I wish you a ton of luck, Al. If you really do try to make a change for the better, like, you have nothing but my greatest blessing, whether you're on the left or the right side of the political spectrum. We're going to get to that too. It's just we need to change. Like, I'm talking smack on liberalism, but it's a specific manifestation of liberalism, you know? Like if we're talking a like classical liberal, you have to make the distinction now. If you tell somebody, because here's the thing, I was a liberal. I voted for Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary in 2016. But then when I saw how far things were going, because from like 2014, 15 onwards, you started seeing people go apeshit. People go just like bonkers, just like totally unreasonable. And I don't know, man. Like I was never like, hell yeah, I love Trump. But yeah, and we're right back in the very similar situation now. Man, now you got me all introspective. I'm trying to get to my poo story. Come on, guys. All right, well, I'm just gonna, whatever. Let's see. All right, so this must have been 2017 or 2018. Okay. I was getting over a sickness. And I was downtown in my silver Pontiac Grand Prix, and it is old. That is an old car. Okay. I've had issues with this car before. So I'm sick, or I was getting over a sickness, and I'm in a car that is kind of old, not great. Okay, it's good. So I drive through the drive-through, get some chicken fries and a Diet Coke, and I park in the parking lot. I settle down. I start to do my thing. I start to munch. I fart. Nobody's around. I'm in this car alone. I lean in. I lean over. I start to let the fart out a little bit. Ooh, and it's one of those farts. There are farts. Of course, you know this ends up with poo. But there are those farts that kind of come slow and hot and kind of, they feel wet, but they're not wet. They're just like hot. That's what I thought this was. I'm like, I'd rip out the fart and I'm like, whew, mamma mia. Okay, finish my food, whatever. Put it in the back seat. Go to turn on my car. Uh-oh. Car's not starting. Oh boy. I got to check the battery. So I get out, I stand up, and my butt cheeks do this as I stand up. They go. I felt it. Oh no. He felt the moisture. Maybe it's just sweat. I don't know. No, that's not sweat. I shit my pants. Oh boy. I needed to get a feel for the nature of the beast. So I look in the glass, the window, because you can see a reflection, and there's just a little wet spot on my booty. Oh boy. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Anytime I go to fast food or something, or anytime ice cream, like whatever it is, I save the napkins. Good thing I have a lot of napkins in the console. Whoom! I rip it open. I grab napkins. I do take one napkin as a test. I slip it down. I untuck my shirt. I slip it down. Oh no! I didn't even get to go in between the crack. I didn't. No, it was just along the butt. I bring it up, and I'm like, slip it under the car. I stood there, wiping out my ass with all of these Baskin Robbins, Burger King napkins, throwing them under the car. And I don't know how many napkins there were. Whatever. Okay. Priorities. What do? I pooed my pants. I got all of the immediate stuff out of the way. What do I do now? I got to change. What am I going to do? Open up the trunk. Luckily, there's a pair of gym shorts. So I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? Change in the parking lot? Luckily, I was not, like I was on the far. It was a big parking lot because it's like Burger King and then Home Depot. So I parked like kind of out there. Um, so I was able to do all this with my back turned, kind of like minding my own business, looking around, whatever. But like to change, and I'm like, I don't know how poopy everything is. So I'm like, I'm gonna pull my shirt down. I know it's gross. I'm gonna pull my shirt down over my butt, and I'm gonna walk very carefully into Burger King and change. So I do it. I go in there. I pull off my pants and the underwear. I just throw. I just threw the underwear in the garbage can. What was I supposed to do? Leave it in there? Like, you can't flush a pair of boxers. You can't. I left it in the garbage can. I'm sorry. Oh, um, they were nice pants, so I wanted to try to save them. So I wrapped them up, uh, and I put on my gym shorts, washed the holy hell out of my hands, and I went back to the car. And then I had tried to open up the hood and fix the battery. I'd walk to the Home Depot and get a wrench. Finally got the car working, and I drive away and I look in the rearview mirror, and there there must have been like just a whole bunch of poopy napkins on the ground. A whole bunch of poopy napkins all over the ground. Oh my gosh. And I drove away. And that's the end of the story. So, what was this? Anthony de Christianis said, have you ever gotten mud butt in a public place and couldn't make it to a restroom? That's the closest I got. I pooed my pants when I was in elementary school, too. I was walking to my friend's house, and it was the same thing. I thought it was a fart. It wasn't a fart. But luckily, my friend was like 3 houses down, so I just kind of like walked back to the house, and kind of the same thing. Anyway. We're going to go straight into the American Civil War that's happening. That is happening. We're in. It's foolish, I think. The reason why I think we're in the middle of a civil war is because most war is not fought physically. Most war is not fought on the battlefield. The battlefield really is sort of the last resort. You have economic warfare, you have cyber warfare, you have political warfare. I mean, sure, you can adjust your level of magnification and say, oh, this is my household warfare. I'm at war with my wife. But when it's country against country or people against people, I think it's very accurate to call it a civil war. Should I be chewing gum? I think I just need a little pick me up, a little more moisture. My one asthma thing, Symbicort, it gives me sort of a raspy voice, so my voice is getting tired. Okay, so American Civil War. The reason I say that, I don't know. I have seen people compare the 2020s. We're only into the 2020s. But I've seen speculation that this is going to be kind of like the 70s. And that's really scary. I mean, I had to start a new Facebook profile just because crap was getting so bonkers. Crap was getting so out of hand. And like I'm not the best person on Facebook. I try to be, but look, I see Facebook as a sort of, it's not good, It's a necessary evil to an extent, because I really want to, like, there are people on Facebook that I love and I've known for years. And that's why it's hard when some of these people end up drifting away or something like that. It's not fun and it's not productive on the micro or the macro scale. I suppose the best place to start that would snap all of this into focus is with the tearing down of monuments. There's going to be a few hot takes here, but I hope nothing offensive? Surely you will let me know if I say something offensive. I think we're fine because we have talked about far more polarizing stuff on this Johncast. Incidentally, I did an interview for a German magazine, Deaf Metal, DEAF, as in I can't hear you because the metal is too loud. I had an interview with this German magazine, and the guy was very nice. I had a great time. Good interview. But he brought up the Johncast. And I'm like, oh boy. I think the Johncast is fun and it works because like we're on the same page, you know? But I don't know. Sometimes we've explored ideas that are kind of unsafe. Like I remember when we were talking about my visit to Calgary, Canada, and I was talking about how my time downtown in Calgary, I did not see hardly any white people. And so it's like we got talking about like, at what point does that become an issue, you know? That's a tricky territory. That's tricky territory. Like at what point does race have a connection to your identity as a country, you know? I'm not going to get into that now. I'm just saying that it's kind of worrisome that a reviewer knows about the Johncast. And you're like, well, what are you doing, John? You're doing a live stream. Don't you want to be famous? And I've been doing some thinking lately, and I'm like, no. I want to be famous as far as it relates to my ability to do music and to perform. And of course, I would like to perform for more people than Jeff and Bob and all of the band's wives at the bar. I've literally played shows like that where it's like, oh, we're in front of all of the other bandmates' girlfriends and wives, and the bartender and Chuck Bubba over there. Not very fun. So yeah, I want to be a successful musician, but I don't like, I'm just seeing like this crap on Facebook and I'm like, I don't want to be under the public eye very much, you know? So I'm kind of relieved in one sense because it's like, okay, so if Prosthetic Records is going to be in charge of like promoting us and advertising us and making us famous, then maybe I can keep a small humble Facebook presence, and let them handle all of that. Anyways, that was a long aside. Suffice it to say, being famous is probably not all it's cracked up to be, because you must be under constant scrutiny. If you say the wrong thing, boy howdy. You're gonna hear about it. Okay, tearing down monuments. Let's tear down some monuments. What do you say? Let's tear down some monuments. The problem with tearing down monuments, and what does it mean? Okay, so here's a few things. As I said, I'm not like 100% on the Trump train. Choo-choo. But Trump did say a while ago, they're tearing down Confederate monuments now, but later it'll be Washington. Later it'll be Jefferson. Everybody, no way, that's preposterous. That's ridiculous. There's no way that would happen. It's happening now. It is happening now. It has happened. It is happening. I'll share the links. Thomas Jefferson statue defaced at University of Virginia. Yep. That's from August 2017. So you may say, oh, that's not very recent. Okay. Theodore Roosevelt. This statue is going to be removed from the Natural History Museum. Boy, those fools who made the Night at the Museum movies must feel like real buffoons. Wasn't Robin Williams Teddy Roosevelt? Boy. Um, yeah, and there was also, yeah, here we go. Here we go. Yep. George Washington. Statue of George Washington toppled and wrapped in burning U.S. flag during George Floyd protest in Portland. And it even goes, was this one in Europe? George Washington statue in Baltimore. No, defaced with red paint. So the iconoclasm, and that's what I'll refer to it as, this iconoclastic movement is not limited to Confederates. It's not. You've unleashed the beast. It's not going to stay within its initially expressed purview. It's really hard to put the genie back in the bottle once you've unleashed it. Oh yeah, here's just the other one I found. A monument thanking the Polish, for liberation of Breda, Netherlands. I'll share it, but it's not super pertinent to what I'm saying. Because this is the one that was in Europe. Where was I? Iconoclasm. Yeah, it's iconoclastic. And then here's the icing on the cake. And you may have seen this, but Sean King, the transracial activist, calls to remove white Jesus statues because it's a form of white supremacy and oppression. Let me see if I can find the original tweet. There's his response to it. Oh, he got death threats. Let me see. Actually, I have to find the original. Here we go. Tweeted Monday. It's important. I don't want to misrepresent him. He says, yes, I think the statues of the white European they claim is Jesus should also come down. They are a form of white supremacy, always have been. In the Bible, when the family of Jesus wanted to hide and blend in, guess where they went? Egypt, not Denmark. Tear them down. He replied to himself saying, yes, all murals and stained glass windows of white Jesus and his European mother and their white friends should also come down. They are a gross form of white supremacy, created as tools of oppression, racist propaganda. They should all come down. So, I mean, there's a lot you could say there, but no, he's just wrong. I have seen people claim that Jesus is black, and that's categorically just false, being realistic. But if I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt, I would say that's extremely unlikely. I know it's an argument from silence, which is not very, persuasive in academic circles. But if Jesus was black, it would have been mentioned, considering the fact that they mention he's Jewish a lot. He was Semitic. Jews are unique because they're a race and a religion. Jesus was a Jew, a Mediterranean Jew. He would have looked like probably almost anybody residing in the Levant right now. He probably looked white-ish, or maybe he was brown-ish, but he wasn't black. And the depictions that we see of Jesus, I mean, it depends. It depends. Let's look up Jesus Christ. Let's look up some images, and I'll share them. Yeah, so you've got some that actually I'm not going to share. That's going to take too much time. Yeah, you've got sort of a spectrum where he's like definitely European Jesus. I can kind of understand that. There is a series on Netflix called Gospel of John, Mark, Luke, Matthew. And they have what I think is probably a more accurate Jesus. Netflix. I actually will share this because... And these are actually accurate. I know that Rachel, my wife, and I have different views religiously, but her and I both bonded over this because it's open enough that oh no, I can't. Oh, I can share link. It's open enough. It's literally what they did is they filmed. Uh, they have a narrator reading the entire gospel, and they are like acting it out. And they have this Jesus portrayed by a man who is a little more on the browner side. He looks browner. I think they shot it in Morocco, so even then you would say it's probably not completely accurate. But if you look up like, let's see, let's not do Israel. Let's do Syria Jew. Let's see if anything pops up. Something not anti-Semitic. Luckily, there's nothing. Yeah, the world's not crazy. Here we go. All right, fine. How about this? These are Jews in Syria. So you've got a spectrum, is what I'm saying. But the idea that Jesus being portrayed with white skin, it's like, I mentioned him earlier, like Ben Shapiro. He is an ethnic Jew. He looks white. He could pass as white. So I don't find it, just on the surface level, I find it very unconvincing what he's trying to say. But, and even then, the idea that it's white supremacist, like, I don't know. I would have to see an argument for that. I'm not convinced. That's where I'm resting. That's not really within the purview of what I'm talking about tonight. But the point is, they will come for everything, everybody. Everything gets scrutinized in this iconoclasm that's happening. I'm taking some notes from a really good public speaker called Jonathan Pajot. So some of this is his thoughts, but I took notes. It's really interesting stuff. This this trend of scrutinizing the negative elements of our past. It's a sort of balancing act, because we do need to, for example, teach our children about slavery. We do need to teach our children about what happened to the Native Americans, the Trail of Tears, that kind of thing. We do need to teach our kids about these interventionist wars that have benefited nobody but fat cats. Like, I would argue, Iraq, overthrowing the Libyan government. Ugh, gross. We do need to shine a light on and be aware of our pimples, warts, and scars, the negative aspects of our culture and country. But if too much emphasis is thrown onto that, what kind of foundation do you have? An interesting comparison that Jonathan Pajot made. He said that he made the comparison to when Noah got drunk after the Great Flood. And so after the Great Flood happened, everybody's chilling. Noah gets totally shit-faced to the point where he passes out naked in his tent. And Shem, Japheth, and Ham, I think, come and are like, whoa, what's he doing in the tent? Ham goes in and is like, bro, he's like totally naked and drunk. So what happens is his two sons, Shem and Japheth, take great care in covering him without seeing his nakedness. If I remember right, they kind of like put a cloth over their backs and they walk back and then drop the cloth on him. So they take great care not to see his nudity. My nudity. In a similar way, this is what we do with our past and even our country's past on a micro and macro level. We take care to cover our weakest, most shameful moments. Now, is it helpful for Noah to be aware of what happened, to remember what happened, and take great care to act in such a way in the future that minimizes his potential to do that again? Yes. there's a difference between learning from the past and having a mature knowledge of the past, and using it for your own benefit in the present and future. There's a difference between that and just really focusing to an unhealthy level on the past and your shameful moments of the past. We're all haunted by our past enough as it is. Now, sorry, I wrote a lot of notes, and this is where, forgive me, it's going to get a little bit scripted. But now in iconoclasm, so, well, no, I don't know. I kind of like freeballing it. Hey, Noah nakedness pun connection. So now iconoclasm is nothing new. The Christians did it when they came to prominence within the Roman Empire. When Christianity was tolerated, the Christians gained more political power. And then when it was made the official state religion, it had essentially a monopoly on the power in that regard. And so, yes, you had pagan temples that were either destroyed, closed down, or had restrictions placed on them. If I remember right, the last Hellenic college, like Greek pagan college, was shut down under Emperor Justinian in the 500s. So under the Christian Roman rule, you had a degree of tolerance and you had a degree of intolerance. But all of this is just to say that even the Christians participated in iconoclasm against the pagans when Christianity became the state religion. And this even happened within the Christian religion, within the Orthodox Catholic faith itself. In the 800s, I believe, you had the Seventh Ecumenical Council, which dealt with iconoclasm, whether or not you could portray Christ at all, whether or not you could portray him in an icon. So, in the argument, the best, simplest argument used by St. John of Damascus, who is my patron saint, is that because the Logos, who is invisible, became incarnate, visible, because the invisible became visible, it is therefore appropriate for us to portray Christ. That is why you see Christ portrayed, but you will not see the Father portrayed. You can find icons where the Father is portrayed, but they're very far and few between. And the only real depictions of the Holy Spirit you will see is in the form of a dove, because that is the way the Holy Spirit was described at Jesus' baptism. So that's kind of a sidestep, but point being, iconoclasm is something that every culture experiences, even Christian cultures. So iconoclasm is nothing new. The Christians did it when they became the dominant faith in Rome, but they had a clear vision. Here's the thing. The Christians had a clear vision of what they were going to replace Roman paganism with. So we have to ask ourselves what the iconoclasts now want to replace our culture with. I think, put on your tinfoil hat, I think it's something at least closely approximating Marxism or far left ideology. John, you're crazy! Well, hold on. Black Lives Matter founder admits they are trained Marxists. And there's a second source. And if you go to the Black Lives Matter About Me page, they actually even openly state that they want to dismantle the traditional nuclear family in favor of something approximating a commune, communism, raising kids in a commune, basically. And you have to wonder, you're toying with fabric that is far more integral than I think you're giving it credit for. I'm not saying anything about gay marriage. That's none of my business, frankly. But what I will say is that there are more straight people than gay people. Can we agree on that? Biologically, at least, I think there is an imperative for that to be the case. That isn't to say we have to abuse or ostracize or marginalize. That doesn't say anything about the gays, all gay people, LGBT. All I'm saying is that straight is the default on a biological level, and it seems to be in a numerical level too. It seems most people are straight. So if a gay couple wants to get married, if a gay couple wants to have children, that's their business. But to toy with the traditional two-parent, that's what I care about, a two-parent household, the standard. I think messing with that is really setting yourself up for some problematic stuff. More problematic than the weird territory that I'm messing with here. Because I know I'm on thin ice here. I have to be careful. But I think you benefit from having a mother and a father in a unique way, because if you have a good mother and a good father, you're getting an accurate, or you're getting the best kind of, sorry, this is way off topic. We're talking about destroying the nuclear family. That's part and parcel with what Black Lives Matter is trying to do. The organization, Black Lives, of course, matter. But the organization is really concerning to me when I read some of this stuff like this. And somebody like Sean King talking about, it's like, what are you going to do when rioters come to your local church and destroy it because white Jesus is white supremacy? Like, what do you, where does it end? That's where it ends. And it will be replaced with something completely nefarious. And I found this very interesting. This is ex-KGB officer Yuri Bezmenov explaining the United States targeted public schools, is basically explaining how communists, how we may have won the Cold War militarily, politically, but in this video, Yuri is talking about how the KGB's emphasis was not on James Bond kind of subversion. It was on cultural, societal subversion. And he goes into detail. This is from like the 50s or 60s. And he's explaining in great detail basically what has been happening for the past 50, 60 years. It's really concerning. Anyways, so Black Lives Matter, the organization, is, after all, founded by self-avowed Marxists. They seek to dissolve the nuclear family and have decidedly far-left politics. The Marxist and Maoist elements easily make it an almost explicitly anti-Christian movement as well, and we see that with Sean King, too. And the reason why Maoism is important is because the Cultural Revolution, if you're not familiar, look that up too, because there are a lot of elements in the Maoist Cultural Revolution that are like manifesting here right now. Not even kidding. Not even kidding. Just check out Sean King's recent comments on iconoclasm toward whiteness in Christian art. Boy, and then it's funny, the whole tinfoil hat thing, I was saying something similar to Rachel. I was like, okay, let's play with an idea here. Just put on your tinfoil hat. And she was like, you've got a tinfoil suit. I'm not crazy, I swear. I went down the rabbit hole with George Soros. I know, some people may be like, conspiracy theorist. I told you, put on your tinfoil hats, dude. I just found it interesting how when you connect the dots, it all really is there. And I will say, I found it interesting. When I was working at Channel 2, KUTV News, as a web journalist, there was a story that had this kind of extreme far left group, and I just followed the breadcrumbs, like where they got their funding from, and they got their funding from Open Societies Foundation, which is, of course, George Soros Foundation. Actually, this organization got their funding from one organization, and they got their funding from Open Societies Foundation. But I just included that in the story. At the very bottom, I was like, here's where they get their funding, all this. And then the next day, somebody had taken that out of my story. That's just an anecdote, but I found that Soros has been involved with several color revolutions since the fall of the Soviet Union, such as Yugoslavia and Ukraine. He has used his vast fortunes to influence the cultures and politics of countries all around the world, such as those two countries, but also Israel, Hungary, the United States, and Ukraine. They are just a handful of countries who have, and a number of countries have also accused him, Hungary most notably, of stirring up problems in their countries. But yeah, using his Open Societies Foundations, Soros has bankrolled division in countries for decades. Yugoslavia, that was an interesting one. What was that one again? Yugoslavia reunion. I think it was the Rose or Reunion Revolution. I think it was the Rose. What was it called? Anti-bureaucratic. I was way off. Maybe it was because it was Red Revolution. Anyway, look it up if you want. It's what was it? The anti-bureaucratic revolution in Yugoslavia. Yeah, it's all there. That's what I'm saying. But he's also given billions of dollars to groups like La Raza, People for the American Way, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the Huffington Post. Interesting enough. And all of these organizations are, I'm sorry, but peddlers of division and misinformation. He's even given millions of dollars to Black Lives Matter. You may contest the Southern Poverty Law Center being included in that, but they're a super shady organization and absolutely biased. Anyways, so I don't know. I was just kind of thinking, again, keep your tinfoil hat on here, but I was just thinking, like, how do you go? So with the whole George Floyd thing, we kind of covered this last week too. There are definite problems within our police, within the American world of police. But like we found that white officers were less likely to shoot a black person than they were a white person. They were more likely to shoot white people. There's a whole lot of statistics that I could go into that are just, they wouldn't be, I'm not going to go over them, but suffice to say, like, I just think we need to pay a lot more attention to our country's culture, and not just our country's culture, but our subcultures' cultures. With this is part of what pains me so much with the riots is they're destroying their own community, and even if, and like we discussed too, they have people coming from outside of the community to riot, and it's like, that's like precisely the opposite of what we need to be doing. We need to be investing in these communities. And now, because of the riots, it's like if you have a Sportsman Warehouse or a, I don't know, if you have like a Best Buy in the area and it gets looted, they might just move. They might just say it's no good. We're not going to station ourselves here. You're affecting your own community, or affecting somebody else's community, depending on who the aggravators are. But it just breaks my heart, because really what we need, it's like, I don't know. I don't have the answers, but I don't know. It's like, maybe if you built community centers, you could have an impact on gang violence or gang participation. I think we need faith too. I mean, I'm sorry to go there, but I think we need a lot of missionary work in those areas. Absolutely. I know I actually double down on that. We need that. We need, and here, sorry, I'm all over the place here, but what holds the United States together? What holds us together? If you have a black person, a Jew, a white guy, and a Latino in a foxhole, and they're all Americans, what do they share in common? They can have different cultures, but what they share is the the American dream, the identification as an American, this shared enthusiasm, this shared melting pot identity that, yeah, you may be a Latino and you have your Latino culture that you've brought with you and you have with your family and friends or wherever your enclave may be, but we all share the same common American ethos. But if you find yourself in a position where, like right now, it's like we don't share the American dream. The American dream feels like it's been shat on. I don't feel people believe in the American dream anymore. And, fair enough. Like I'll be in the front of the line with you, at the front barricade with you, protesting racism, discrimination, like any of this. Like I'm with you. But I just think we need to be careful about what we destroy. And if we don't share a common American ethos, then we're stripped down to the second level. And we're split. And it's so easy to split us. Race is one of the easiest things to split us up over. Religion is another one, which is why I think if we can't have a unified national ethos, then we need as many commonalities as we can have. We need as much commonality as we can have right now. So yes, I say send the missionaries into the inner city. I say evangelize. Of course, I would prefer if they would be Orthodox, but I'm friends with the Baptists too. Get them in there. Yeah, but so I was just thinking, how do you go from an isolated incident in the Midwest to the Western world? Because a lot of this is happening in Europe too, peculiarly enough. How do you go from an isolated incident to the whole country losing its freaking mind? How do you go from that? I think there's been a lot of preparation, a lot of groundwork laid. And if memory serves me right, sorry, but George Soros Open Societies Foundation came in here around 2003 or 2004 into the US. I don't know, maybe it's childhood innocence, but I remember in the 90s, it was so much emphasis on I'm white and you're black and it doesn't matter. We come together. The attitude was like that. The attitude was togetherness. Your skin color doesn't matter. We're all humans. We're all God's creatures. We're all in this together. Let's build each other up. You don't see that anymore. It's focused on tearing down instead of building up. And speaking of color revolutions, I also wrote, we're seeing a black color revolution that's being guided into a red revolution. No, 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 no. It's a Soviet national anthem. Boy, and the other thing too, just regarding iconoclasm, I wrote, a society with cultural and historical amnesia can be duped into anything. They want to crush the nuclear family, everything. It will not stop with Confederate statues. So I just find it interesting too that you have, it feels like there's a much stronger effort being placed in the US right now. Europe is already pretty much there, Western Europe anyways. I remember the BBC was promoting the idea that like Rome was like really, really multiracial, and to an extent, sure, because the Roman Empire spanned the whole Mediterranean. But I don't know, just this portrayal of like Romans as like black people struck me as very weird. And there's even a show on Netflix called The Fall of Troy, and they have Zeus as a black guy. They have another goddess as a black chick. Achilles is a black guy. And I'm just like, what, what is this? What's going on? It's like, I don't have anything. It's not a racist thing. It just feels like a concerted effort. I don't know. It just feels weird. I don't know I don't know what about it. It's like, what if we made a movie about a really important African folk tale, but we had like 5 actors, main characters, portrayed as white guys. It's like, wouldn't that be kind of strange? And all right, so maybe that's it, because, sorry, I'm way off topic here again, but it's like Lord of the Rings. Can you imagine Samuel L. Jackson in Lord of the Rings, or Morgan Freeman or something? It feels weird, right? Does it? Or am I crazy? But it feels weird to me, I think, because the whole fantasy genre is based off of essentially medieval England. And so it would feel out of place. I don't know. I'm kind of free throwing around ideas here. We'll come back to questions, but we're getting close to the end. I don't want to go too far over 2 hours. What did I click? Oh yeah, Southern Poverty Law Center. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So just back again to, it's like, if the Christians performed iconoclasm, but they had a specific idea of what they were going to replace Roman paganism with. There is definitely an iconoclasm happening in the US right now. What are they going to replace it with? Doesn't take a lot of imagination to guess what that will be. And I think it will happen. I don't want it to, but I think it will. And yeah, I mean, a society with cultural and historical amnesia can be made into anything. Yeah, and then I was just thinking about getting into a positive feedback loop. It's like, if I slap you, then you slap me, then I punch you, then you hit me over the head with a chair. It's like just getting back down to basics. It's like, if we meet evil with evil, it's just going to continue to blow up. It's just going to continue to get worse and worse, and that's what's happening. It's getting worse and worse. I mean, like, look at World War I. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, I think he was, got assassinated. One guy. Everything blew up. Everything blew up. Because nobody could... Well, I'm not going to speculate on World War I and what happened. I have some ideas, but... So the whole point, what I wrote here is, don't aim at winning, aim at peace. When you fight with your spouse, you don't want to win. You want to solve the problem. You want to come to an agreeable solution. And that gets back to the whole foxhole thing. If every fight I had with Rachel, I tried to win, what kind of relationship would we have? It'd be terrible if you focused on winning instead of finding a solution. And I think right now, we're so divided right now. We have left and we have right. And that's it. Like the Libertarians, the Green Party, they're teeny. And they get pulled into it too. How many Libertarians ended up voting for Hillary Clinton just because they didn't want Trump, or the other way around? Everybody gets sucked into it. It's no good. For example, Rachel and I were thinking, what do we do for Christmas? Because we're looking at trying to start a family here soon. What do we do about Christmas? Because I would like to take the kids to liturgy on Christmas morning. Rachel would rather not. Part of, because like we started talking, how do we solve this? Not how am I going to get Rachel to do it my way? No. It was, what can we do that's going to make everybody the most happy as possible? Rachel's concern was that I have a tradition. I have something that's sort of like to pass on. But what does she have? Where's her tradition? Where does she get heard? Where does she get validation? Where does she get to pass something on to the kids? She has a weird Christmas tradition that I don't like. And I'll explain why. Well, it may become obvious here in a sec. Her family opens up all of their presents on Christmas Eve at midnight. At midnight, they go to town. Number one, I like to get to bed early. Number two, I'm kind of OCD, and I'm like, you open up presents on Christmas morning because you have to wake up, you have to do presents, and it's, ooh, lovely, you have eggnog and hot chocolate, and you do it on order. So I'm like, well, what kind of compromise can be made? Like, maybe we as a family do your Christmas Eve tradition. It's not my favorite, but I'm sure going to liturgy isn't your favorite either. So can we compromise on that? And she actually found it to be very agreeable. So again, it's like if she focused on winning, or if I focused on winning, we would just have continued to fight. Hey, there's a window into my personal life. The best way to set the world straight, this was a Jordan Peterson quote, the best way to set the world straight is by constraining the malevolence in your own heart. Yeah. And then, yeah, so the one last thing that I observed is, it seems to me that, and we've talked about this before too, I talk like you all have watched all of the live streams, but we've talked about how you need a balance between left and right. You can't be all left. You can't be all right. You can't be all socialist. You can't be all capitalist. You have to have some kind of balancing act. So, but I've noticed the left really likes and is really good at tearing things down, at destroying. All right, that's put in an uncharitable light. But they're also really good at pushing boundaries and being progressive and questioning things. Okay, the right is really good at maintaining and holding on to things. And so if it was just this, then you would never change, even when some really good ideas got brought up. And if you were only progressing and changing, you would have nothing to hold on to. So again, it's like you need a balance. I think we're pretty close to the end. We've kept a pretty good number of people here. Oh, the last thing. Well, there's a few, because I do want to get to everybody's questions, but the last thing I wanted to talk about, yes, it's good that you stuck with me to the end. Are you familiar with CHOP? CHOP, the zone in Seattle that was occupied by the protesters. The rioters. These people are rioters, as far as I'm concerned. The people who sequestered off, what was it, like 6 blocks in Seattle, and started their own little society. A lot of interesting stuff has been happening, such as shootings. I'll share links here. But yeah, there have been like 3 or 4 shootings in this area. And what's really interesting, this is unrelated. This next, mob calls in fake shooting, then attacks responding officers in ambush. That's not from CHOP, but this incredibly anti-police mentality, unreasonable anti-police mentality that has been manifesting, because when people were shot in Chaz, the Chaz zone, emergency responders came and they would not let the emergency responders in. They eventually said, we'll let the ambulance in, but not the police. And, oh man, it's like, could that life, because like I think 2 or 3 people have died as a result of shootings that took place in these utopias. So you just wonder, like, could those lives have been saved if the rioters had not prevented emergency responders from accessing the victims? It's possible. I don't know. I don't know. But here's the thing that I found particularly interesting. It was originally called, it's going to be okay. It's like the summer of love. It's like, no, people are getting shot in there. They erected walls. They patrolled it armed. They identified you coming in and out. It really was fancied as an autonomous zone. Can you imagine, though, if people on the right had done this? Just imagine. Just imagine if a bunch of Tea Party protesters took over 6 square blocks in the city and erected walls and had armed people at the entrances and were IDing people going in and out. Can you imagine? It would be apocalyptic. And you know that if Obama was president, would have been smacked down. The media would have been totally universally against it. But that's not what we see here. We have armed leftists taking over a section of a major city. Just think about that for a second. Just say it out loud. Armed political activists took over a huge swath of a major city. American Civil War. If that can happen, if people can take over a portion of the city, we're already there, man. Like, it's moved beyond its original, like, mission statement. I mean, and you see that with the tearing down of Lincoln and Roosevelt and Jefferson and Washington. No. This has moved into the real world, so to speak. This has moved into the physical world. And funny enough, the businesses who were occupied by the Chaz are now apparently suing the city, I think, for not doing anything about it. So, I can only hope that the residents of Seattle wake up to this nonsense. Noah says, what bothers me about Chaz/CHOP is that they are hurting the U.S. businesses around there, and the government isn't doing much. Bingo. Yeah, precisely. He also says, however, in Waco, you had the cult not hurting anybody but themselves, and the ATF burned them alive. Yeah. Al says, oh, it gets even worse, Noah. Apparently, Seattle's mayor is sympathetic to Chaz. Yeah, I saw that. He says, the double standards is yet another reason why I want to get into California's legislature. Please do. I feel that the Republican Party in general is far too tepid on matters like this, nearly to cowardice. That's the thing, too, is allegiances. I definitely consider myself conservative, but I support the Republican Party when they do stuff I like, and I do not support them when they do stuff I don't like. And in the local government, there are times where I even support local Democrats, although it's Utah, so there's not a huge number of them. But I'm open to Democrats, but not the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes that we're seeing become more popular. She just won re-election in her district, So AOC is here to stay. And I am a little bit worried because I see this becoming the norm. What do they call it? The Overton window? It's being shifted left. To be on the right is becoming increasingly taboo. And you get looped in with the worst of them. Guilty by association. But allegiance. That's a good place for me to segue out into the final questions, because we've hit the 2-hour mark now. For you guys, it may be an hour 50 minutes because I was on here a little earlier. Anyways, allegiance. So earlier I said I want to be wrong. I really want to be wrong on this, but earlier I indicated that I see the US losing this iconoclasm conflict, this American Civil War. I see the revolutionaries winning and the counter-revolutionaries losing. I would be a counter-revolutionary. I don't see it ending well for the US. We need a stronger resistance, and it's not there yet. Okay, doom and gloom. Take a step back. You had the revolution in Russia. They became communist. Horrible, terrible things happened. Horrible, terrible things happened. And in spite of all that, the people clung to their faith super hard, to the point where even near the later years, as I understand it, the USSR began to open up a little bit to orthodoxy. So, in my critiques of capitalism and liberalism, I have put my finger on the spiritual deadness of the US and cultural deadness. The critiques of capitalism may be a good thing to touch on again in another podcast or live stream. But the point is, if you want to follow Christ, pick up your cross and follow him up to the hill of suffering, where by the cross, by Christ's suffering on the cross, you too can transcend suffering. True faith is tested and found in suffering. Certainly a lot of the time. Christ doesn't promise cupcakes and Chardonnay. He promises a cross on a hill. And I wonder if the US does, after all of this, become a... I don't expect us to become a new USSR, but I wonder if we would become something like the EU sympathetic side of Ukraine, you know? I wonder if this would be more of a Ukraine situation where we just end up falling in line with far left EU politics, you know? And it's decidedly socialist with a lesser presence of capitalism. But I don't know. I just wonder. I wonder if all of this, when you take that level of magnification up, I wonder if it would see, oddly enough, a revival of religiosity, a revival of, dare I say, Christianity? Could be. Christianity, it's no secret that in the Western world, Christianity has been on the decline. Oddly enough, in the Southern Hemisphere, it's been on the incline. It's been going up. So, I don't know. I just think for how spiritually and culturally dead the US has become, I mean, we had, 200 years of a good run? Maybe we have to go through the fire and through the flames for 200 years and then come out on the other side of it stronger and better. I don't know. I don't expect America's story is going to end with an authoritarian communist regime. Our story is not over yet. So if we have very difficult times ahead, then so be it. But I just would hope that would be a calling for us to take a step back and examine what really matters to us in our lives. And it's tricky. I mean, I had the Mott and Bailey fallacy up here. The Mott and Bailey fallacy is basically you have the Bailey, which is like the lower city, and then you have the Mott, which is the castle on the top of the hill. And the Mott would be, we need police reform. And the Bailey would be defund police precincts, abolish police. So if you attack me, it's like you have to attack. They try to like make them bring them together. It's like you can't attack one without attacking the other. If you attack abolishing police, they say, well, we just like they'd fall back on the police reform thing. Basically, what I'm getting at is it's tricky. You know, like I am still very vocal in support of police reform. I have no problem saying that Black Lives Matter. They do matter. I don't support the organization Black Lives Matter, but I guess what I'm just trying to say is it's tricky because a lot of what they're saying I do support, but they're trying to sneak in all of this other stuff that I just can't get behind. And it's frustrating. It's like with the recent thing that happened with the Senate and House. The Senate had a bill like ready to go for police reform where the Democrats' desires would have been like they would have gotten about 70 to 80% of what they wanted. And rather than get on board with that, the Democrats like sabotaged it. They wouldn't let it go. And now the Democrats in the House are saying, this is our bill, and we're not going to allow any amendments. We're not going to allow anything, and, you know, take it or leave it. And it just seems like a power play. It seems like a power play to say the Republicans weren't doing enough. And when we had our bill, they wouldn't pass it. They shut it down. So the Republicans are against police reform. It's like you could have gotten 70 to 80% of what you wanted, apparently. So you're biting off your nose to spite your face, man. And like I think Al mentioned too, it's like, especially with what's been happening the past few weeks, you've seen how spineless both the Republicans and the Democrats are. Like ultimately, we need to have another Harmony of Church and State live stream because this is not tenable. Okay. So we'll just get to the last things. Karunka. Your vocal journey, techniques, milestones, warm-ups, influences, etc. I may have to do another, like an actual produced video on that. I know it received the most votes, but I think that would be best done in its own little video. The last thing I'm going to do is Alexander Baker. Hey, who is David Ertl, mentioned in 30 Years of Terror on the Judicator album Sleepy Plesso? This book, Iron Kingdom, is about the rise and fall of Prussia, 1600 to 1947. And I'm going to read an excerpt because what happened to David Ertl in 30 Years of Terror, 30 years of terror, 30 years of shame, and no one is safe here from Swedish or from Danes. 30 years of hardship, the soldiers live off the land. Anyways, happened during the 30 years war. And basically what happened is, my understanding is that Brandenburg, the general German area, was like the place everybody passed through. So pass around Patty. They were just, what's the word? Plundered and abused by everybody who came through. I don't want to read a whole bunch because I already read so much today. My cheeks are getting tired. So we really are on the last bit here, but atrocity stories. Narratives of extreme violence and cruelty by armed men against civilians loom so large in the literary depictions of the 30 Years' War that some historians have been tempted to dismiss them as the accoutrements of a myth of all-destructive fury or a fable of wholesale ruin and misery. There is no doubt that atrocity stories became a genre in their own right in contemporary reporting of this war. A good example is Philip Vincent's book, The Lamentations of Germany, which listed the horrors suffered by the innocents, featuring graphic plates entitled Croats, Croatians, Eat Children, Noses and Ears Cut Off to Make Hand Bands, and so on. Boy. Official reports from Haveland report numerous beatings, house burnings, rapes, and wanton destruction of property. People living on the outskirts of Plaue, just a few kilometers to the east of Brandenburg City, described a through march by imperial troops on their way to Saxony on New Year's Day, 1639, during which, quote, many old people were tortured to death, shot dead, various women and girls raped to death, children hanged, sometimes even burnt or stripped naked, so that they perished in the extreme cold. In one of the most evocative memoirs that survives from Brandenburg, Peter Thiel, customs officer and town clerk at Balitz, near Potsdam, which I've been to, Balitz and Potsdam, described the conduct of the imperial army that passed through his town in 1637. In order to force a certain Jürgen Weber, a baker in the town, to reveal where he had concealed his money, the Imperials stabbed a piece of wood half a finger long into his penis. Thiel described the Swedish draft, like a drink, the Swedish draft, said to have been invented by the Swedes, but widely reported of all armies and a fixture in later literary representations of the war. The robbers and murderers took a piece of wood and stuck it down the poor wretches' throats, stirred it, and poured in water, adding sand or even human feces, and pitifully tortured the people for money, as transpired with a citizen of Balitz called David Ertl, who died of it soon after. Another man, oh man, I got goosebumps. I literally have goosebumps. Like, reading that is just horrible. Everything. Another man by the name of Kruger Müller was caught by imperial soldiers, bound by his hands and feet, and roasted over a fire until he revealed the whereabouts of his money. But no sooner had his tormentors taken the money and gone than another raiding party of Imperials arrived in the town. Hearing that their colleagues had already roasted 100 thalers out of Müller, money, $100, I don't know, they carried him back to the fire and held him with his face in the flames, roasting him, quote, for so long that he died of it, and his skin just came off like that of a slaughtered goose. The cattle merchant, Jürgen Müller, was likewise roasted to death for his money. I could go on. This is a big, actually, it's just another 2.5 pages. Whew. Wow, that's horrible. I wanted to put that in Sleepy Plesso because I felt David Ertl, for example. I mean, I could have used Muller too, but you only have so much time in a song. Excuse me, only so much space on the lyric sheet. But I figured here's a guy who's just a footnote in a book, just a footnote. I just figured, man, if you can shine a light on what happened to one man whose life may have meant nothing, you know, that's a good thing to immortalize a guy who had to go through something like that. Yeah, anywho, I think that's about it for today, but yeah, it's a very precarious place we're leaving off here. It's not very positive, you know. But I guess I would just say focus on yourself. Um, I gave this challenge last time, and I'll give it again, and next time it'll be a different one. But I will say, forgive somebody tonight. Forgive somebody tonight, even if it's yourself. But you have to forgive somebody. Yeah. Okay. Love you guys. Hope you have a great night. Thank you for tuning in. This was a lot of fun. I hope you had a lot of fun. I guess you have, because you've stuck around for 2 hours and 15 minutes, but Lord love a duck. I'll see you again in 3 weeks. And have a great night.